Hi, everyone. Hi, Marjorie. Hi, Bella. I'll let you guys introduce yourself. I'm Trip Jennings, Executive Director of New Mexico In Depth. We are a digital media outlet here in New Mexico, as the name attests. And we are here to talk about a story that Bella did in partnership with NMPBS. But before we go into that, I would like both of you to introduce yourselves to the viewers.
Go ahead, Bella.
Okay. My name's Bella. I'm a Yurok tribal member and I cover Indigenous affairs for New Mexico in Depth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marjorie Childress. I'm the managing editor at New Mexico in Depth, which means I get to work closely with Bella every week, which is really great.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. So we published co-published a story a visually reported story and also a small text story on our site in partnership with NPBS a week and a half ago. And Bella, can you tell us a little bit about the story, what it was, and how you came to report the story? What led you down the path of that story?
Yeah, so the story is exploring a couple of perspectives from a handful of Native people living in Albuquerque. And I started thinking about the story partly after having a conversation with Atza Don Chavez, who's the director of NM Native Vote, which is a nonprofit based here in Albuquerque that's sort of focused on civic engagement in Native communities. And I wanted to talk with Atza partly about just what she's hearing from Native voters this year, and also about some of the barriers that Native voters, especially in more rural communities, face. And one thing she mentioned to me that I thought was really interesting, it's something I've heard before, is that for some Native people, there's sort of this feeling that that voting, the way she put it is there's this feeling among some Native people that she talks with that voting is selling out, that it's sort of giving legitimacy to the system that was established by a government that's oppressed us. And so we kind of, yeah, we talked about these really kind of complex feelings about voting in Native communities. And she told me that, sort of adding to that, this year she's heard concerns, especially from some young Native people, about voting for Kamala Harris because of the Biden administration's support for Israel's war on Gaza. And so I really wanted to hear from young Native people directly and really explore what Atza shared with me. And that kind of turned into a collaboration with New Mexico PBS.
Yeah, can you tell us? I mean, I found the interviews you did. I mean, you went out in the field, you talked to people, you talked to Atza in her office. It looked like her office. And then you went to a protest in Albuquerque. And I found some of the perspectives extraordinarily interesting. In the sense that, we had at least a couple of speakers, and I'm talking about the what's happening in the Middle East, how some of the speakers really thought that what was happening to the Gazans, the forced removal of the population, was somewhat reminiscent of what their ancestors did with forced relocations in American history. And I've read that perspective, but it's one thing to read about it, and it's another thing to actually see people talk about it. How did, what was your take when you heard these people saying this to you? You've probably heard the same thing, but I mean, what was your take? How did you digest that, maybe?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you that it's very different to read about those perspectives, which I've also, I think, been seeing, over the past year, versus being face to face with someone and talking about, for one of the people that we talked with, who is a doctor, Andre, he told us that seeing Palestinians forced to flee their homes, traveling from the north to the south of Gaza, reminded him of the long walk and the Trail of Tears. And he talked about, for the Dakota side of his family, going through that exact same experience of forced removal of, yeah, it was honestly, it was a really emotional conversation. And I guess I sort of expected that, but yeah, it is really different to actually have that conversation versus just hearing about it. And I think, the way he described it too was that it's really intense to be opening your phone every day and seeing that footage. And, that was a feeling that we heard from actually everyone we talked with, even people who are voting. That was one of the things that they talked about, wishing that Kamala Harris talked about more or talked about differently. That was one question we asked voters who are planning to vote for Kamala Harris was, a lot of concern over what is being done to Palestinians.
Mhm. Marjorie, do you have any takeaways? I mean, or
Yeah,
questions
I
you want
was
to ask
really
me?
struck by I was really struck with the wrestling that I sensed people were doing around um engaging in voting in our two-party system when they feel like the leaders of both parties are supporting um what's happening to the Palestinians, like through our military aid to Israel mainly. Um, and I was struck with the wrestling that was going on around whether or not we should vote or not. And there were some clear some of the folks that you talked to were just very clear that they didn't plan on voting, and they were really pointing to what's happening in Gaza, at the same time bringing in other contexts, like the historical context of indigenous people in the United States, while others were acknowledging that history, but also saying there are very real reasons for why we're voting. So how did you weigh those two different, where people landed on whether to vote or not in terms of the reporting that you did?
Yeah, I think even for, the this person who is a real advocate for voting, Atza, this was something she talked about too, was these what she described as, clear parallels between what has happened to Native Americans and what is now happening to Palestinians. But the way she talked about it was she has a lot of concern about what a second Donald Trump presidency could look like. She talked about, being concerned as a Two-Spirit woman, being concerned about a loss of LGBT rights, reproductive rights. And, the way she talked about it was feeling like if Kamala Harris is elected, then there's maybe an opportunity to push for the change that people want to see on the United States policy of support for Israel. And so I think that was kind of the way that she's thinking about that and weighing those two things. And that was something, we heard from one young voter we talked with too, was that was one of two things that she said that she wishes Kamala Harris had a different position on or talked about differently. But that she also is, very concerned about Project 2025, which is this, nearly 1,000-page long, essentially policy blueprint that was authored in part by former Trump administration officials. Yeah.
I want to say real quick for any viewers who happen to catch this who are not from New Mexico, just a little context. New Mexico is home to 23 federally recognized tribes. It's also indigenous people make up more than 10% of the population. And this is why we wanted to do a partnership with NMPBS, because I don't know that many people do focus on the indigenous vote oftentimes. And so it was extraordinary to see. I want to say this is extraordinary because we have been watching the viewer count on the video on YouTube. It's up now to 32,000 views with nearly 700 comments, which is those are big numbers. for NMPBS. Those are definitely big numbers for us and anything we've done associated with video. I've been struck by not only the numbers and the viewerships, but honestly, I feel really good about being a journalist after reading some of these comments because we have provoked a discussion on the video. People are like, no, wait, you gotta vote. You can't,
Mhm.
if you don't vote, you can't complain. I used to hear this all the time, or there's this like, oh yeah, the system is rigged or whatever. I mean, there's all these comments back and forth, and it is like watching a discussion or a debate of Americans kind of like wrestling with what do we do with this election? Do you guys feel that way too as you're looking
Well,
at the
yeah, the
comments?
comment section of the video, the New Mexico PBS video is fascinating. It's well worth a read.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really surprising for me. I didn't at all know what to expect when we put it out there. So that's been really encouraging to see. And I think, one thing I do want to note, I think it's really important. We talked with 6 people, and of course there are a whole lot of other perspectives out there that were not included in that video. And I think that's yeah, really important to add that yeah, it was, in no way meant to be representative of the attitudes of all Native people, right? Because that would be impossible.
Right.
Important, disclaimer there, because as we political junkies know, I mean, Native Americans, Navajos and Hopis have they did play a part in Arizona going for Joe Biden in 2020. So it's an important part of the vote. So there are many Native Americans who do vote. So thank you for that. Yeah, we needed to say that this is not representative of the indigenous community, which, like any other community, is extraordinarily complicated. Yeah.
I think maybe some other sort of important context that we actually didn't include in that story is some of the kind of history of the struggle for Native American voting rights. I think that has so much to do with, for instance, the way Atsa, the director of NM Native Vote, kind of thinks about voting. Native Americans became US citizens in 1924, but in some states were not allowed to vote for, in some cases, decades after that. And New Mexico is included in that. Our state constitution didn't allow Native people living on reservations to vote. And it was Miguel Trujillo, who's a veteran from Isleta Pueblo, who challenged that in court and won in 1948, I want to say. So almost 25 years after the Citizenship Act. So I think that has a lot to do with the way that at least some Native people think about voting of, there was such a struggle to get to where we are now. And even today, there are so many barriers for Native people in trying to vote. So I think for some people, it's this feeling of, voting is an obligation, especially given that history.
I want to add to that this is so important that we, on our kind of small story that we did on our site at nmindepth.com, you can go find the story there with the video. Also, if you want to go see the video, it's at nmpbs, is it .org or .com? I always forget. It's nmpbs, look it up. You'll find it. Yeah, the history, being someone who was not raised in New Mexico and raised back east, I didn't know a lot of this history until I moved out to New Mexico. 1924 for citizenship, 1948, people living on reservations weren't able, this is New Mexico, weren't able to vote until that year. And I want to say that most indigenous folks probably were living on reservations back. This is before I think the Nixon administration really pushed for moving people out of reservations, as I recall. So it was before that. And I've learned a lot of this history living in New Mexico. And for all those folks who are really interested in indigenous history and American history, there's a lot we didn't learn probably. I know I didn't in school, so it's very helpful for these kind of stories. Does that kind of wrap it up for us, you think?
I
Yeah,
think
we don't
so,
have anything
yeah.
more to say. Of course, people who know me know that I could talk for another 3 hours, but you don't have that kind of time. Yeah, what, Marjorie, were you going to say something? Can't hear you. You're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah. I think Margie was giving me a hard time there, guys.
No, I might have been giving you a little bit of a hard time. Yeah,
Yeah.
we could obviously just go on at length about the story, but I really feel like I'll just put a plug in for people to go watch the video that Bella and our colleagues over at NMPBS put together, because it is really, really thought-provoking and informative around just some really just deep issues in New Mexico and among Indigenous people. So it was a fascinating story, Bella. I found it really compelling.
And just to make sure that I got the suffix correct, it's nmpbs.org. Go over there. If you want to see the video, you can go to our site too. But we certainly want to shout out our partners who, it was fun working with them. So thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you later. We're going to try to do a few more of these. And we'll see you probably before the election, but definitely after the election. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.